Hello, I've created this brief video to help people with fact sheet assignments. There are more than one of them in the course of the program, and it doesn't really matter which one you are currently doing. This video will give you sort of a walkthrough of the best way to go about this type of assignment, including how to cite, which is a really important academic requirement. One of the most important things to do is to know the focal point or the aim of this particular assignment. You will be assigned a diagnosis, and my aim is that you will be a bit of an expert in that particular diagnosis by the time you're done. But also, if everybody does this well, we will be able to compile all these fact sheets into a reference document that the entire class can take with them and use in the field later on. Hopefully, people will be able to, for example, say, I wonder if a person I am supporting might have a particular diagnosis, and be able to turn to your reference sheet and see whether the pattern that they're seeing in their supported individual resembles the pattern you describe. And with that in mind, some of the most important general considerations are, first and foremost, that your document is accurate. And this often boils down to making sure that you've identified good sources and ample sources. They should be recent. And this is particularly important when you're going through things like how frequent does the disorder occur, or what kind of treatment occurs for that, because those things tend to change more over time than, for example, the description of the symptoms of the disorder, which tend to be fairly well known over a long period of time. As much as possible, we should be looking for Canadian data. But if we cannot find recent Canadian data or reliable Canadian data, then it's acceptable to go out and find American, British, Australian, or New Zealand type data as good substitutes. However, when you do that, it's usually a good idea to get more than one of those to help corroborate or fill out your picture. Make sure your data sources are reliable. For example, universities and institutes of health and other government organizations tend to be good sources of reliable and credible information. But when people are trying to sell you something or tell you their personal story, or when it's worked by another student from another university that's online, we need to make sure we're very careful. And this is why we have multiple sources, because we're looking for source A and source B to corroborate or concur with one another. One of the other things that's really important is to make sure that your fact sheet is simple. Less is more. It should be something that a person can look at and use in quick order. The answers need to be in the correct sections, for example. The intention is to make sure people can go to that document and use it as a reference. And with that in mind, it should be written in clear point form. Don't write in paragraphs. And you do not need things like an introduction or a conclusion or a thesis statement. You must cite your work in text and at the end. Now that can be a bit freaky to people the first few times that they do it, but don't worry, we're going to walk through what those terms mean and how to do them before the end of this video. And make sure that you answer all of the questions in the assignment. Sometimes it feels like you should do more than that because it seems like your sheet is too short, but we're looking for something between 1 and 2 pages most of the time. If you go and add a lot more information, then it'll be hard for people to pull out the stuff that's really essential and valuable. And if you don't answer the questions correctly, then your sheet will be of no use. So make sure that you say not more and not less than what you've been asked. Okay, let's take a look at an example of a fact sheet assignment. Again, you'll be asked to do this more than one time in the course of the entire CSW program. And so I pulled up one of the examples, and you might be doing one that's slightly different, but the big ideas here should still help you. This particular one is from Module 213, Physical Disabilities in Personal Care. So, first, of course, you need to give your name, but also the name of the disorder. Please make sure that you give the name completely, spelled correctly. Sometimes a disorder has more than one name, and that's okay. For example, you could give its formal name and its informal name. An example of this would be ALS. What's the full name of ALS and what's its nickname? So I won't tell you the answer to that question in this video, but if that's your assignment, you should do it. Next is, how is this disorder caused? There are a couple of these boxes that tend to be a bit confusing to people, and perhaps the first one is genetic. This particular fact sheet is not asking you whether or not it's genetic and hereditary, which means that a person can pass it in their genetic material to the next generation, or if it's genetic and spontaneous. Sometimes people have genetic disorders that didn't come from their parents. We don't quite know why they had the genes kind of get messed up during the process of fertilization. But sometimes when that happens, people are the only generation that has this genetic disorder. You're not really being asked to talk about that here. All that we really care about is whether it's a genetic disorder from the standpoint that it is going to be incurable, the person is going to have been born with it, and you and I can't get it from them by being in contact. So you don't need to really get into a lot of detail. Sometimes people have non-genetic birth defects. These are caused by things like being prematurely born or not having enough oxygen at the point of birth. And again, you're not really being asked to identify which of those causes it. You're just being asked to identify whether it's caused at birth by some type of trauma. And again, the main idea here is for people to realize this would be a lifelong disorder, that it would probably not be curable, and that it would not be passed along to somebody else through contact. Caused by infection. Again, you don't really need to get into a lot of detail here. It's simply a checkbox. But as you do research, you may start to see that it could be infectious from bacteria, viruses, fungus, or other pathogens. And so it is possible for all of those things to be infection. Caused by injury could be things like car accidents or drowning. There's a lot of different ones. And caused by poisoning, most people will understand what that means, but you might also include things like drug overdoses in that. Quite often, we simply do not know or do not definitively know the cause of a particular disorder. And it's not uncommon for students, as they're doing research, to find out that scientists think that a particular cause might be behind it, or that there is research being done in a particular area. When that happens, check this box that says Other and give a brief description of what scientists think is going on. But don't check this box if scientists do know what's going on and are doing more research. Usually you'll be checking one box here. What is the incidence or frequency of this disorder? Here we're simply being asked to consider how many people in a given population typically get it. One important thing here is that I really want you to try and find Canadian data. It's worth it to look for it for a little bit longer. And the data should be pretty recent, maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 if you're really looking hard and can't find something. If you can't find Canadian data, as I've said earlier, you can look at other comparable countries that have similar systems and rigorous academic methods. However, the reason we want Canadian data is because we live in Canada, and that makes this a much more useful document. Now, typically there are 3 ways that people can answer this question. The first is my preferred way. It's usually expressed as a ratio. So it's common for us to hear a number out of 1,000 people or out of 100,000 people. So you might say something like 100 out of every 100,000 will get this disorder. That is my preferred way because as populations change in a given country, we know that the overall number of cases will change, but the overall percentage will remain relatively the same. The second way we can do it is to talk about the percentage of a population that will get it, and again, that's useful. And the third way is a little less my favorite, but it still works, and that is to describe the number of people in Canada who get it per year. Any of those is acceptable. Does this disorder usually include cognitive effects? Now, there are 2 things that seem to get in the way of people answering this simple question clearly. And you'll notice it's just a checkbox. The first is the question of usually. Sometimes people go down a bit of a rabbit hole as they're doing research, and they find some scientist somewhere who says that their disorder can have cognitive effects. But that person is in the minority, or it's a pretty obscure piece of information. And again, I would remind you that the whole point of this is for individuals that you work with to be recognizable. There's symptoms for us to go, oh, that looks like a particular pattern. So we don't want to describe the zebras, we want to describe the horses, the more common examples. The second thing that confuses people here is what we mean by cognitive. Cognitive means ability to think, as in intellectualize. So intellectual disability would be a good way of looking at this. Or the loss of cognitive functions, such as we might see with dementia. Things like memory, planning, and recognizing things are all examples of cognitive effects. I really don't need you to go off and kind of get into even more obscure detail than that. Is this disorder infectious? Means can it be passed on from one person to the next? And there are lots of different ways this could happen. Sexual contact, breathing on somebody, coughing droplets, or passing on body fluids in other ways are just a few examples. But again, the question really just asks you if that's possible so that we know whether we need to be particularly careful when working with somebody. Is this disorder progressive, meaning does it get worse over time? And is the disorder curable? Now, some disorders are managed or treated, but they are not expected to go away. Those are not curable disorders. If a disorder is curable, we expect that our treatment will lead to that disorder going away. And there are lots of disorders that receive some sort of treatment, but not with the intention of curing them. Is this disorder fatal? What we're asking is, will this disorder result in somebody dying? And there are really three possible answers here. One is the answer no. Quite commonly, people get some diseases and don't die. For example, the common cold. Other diseases are invariably fatal. For example, we could talk about HIV/AIDS is considered a terminal disease. However, although that's changing, there are some diseases where the person would have a risk of fatality and not necessarily be guaranteed that they would. So you might want to make a comment here. What are the most common symptoms of this disorder? Please focus on the word common. This is where you want to have corroborating sources and make sure you have definitive resources. So if you are looking at diabetes and you have a list of symptoms from the American Diabetes Association, I would go with those before I would go with something that was far longer and more obscure. What are the most common treatment and or management needs for this disorder? So treatment could include symptom management or pain management. You could also talk about helping a person to slow the effects of their disease, or it could be about trying to find a way to cure the person. But sometimes it's about adaptations. We don't expect a person necessarily to get better, and all we're doing is trying to habilitate or meet their needs around them. Some of the things people can talk about here are things like whether a person would be given medicines, whether surgery is called for, whether certain types of therapies are used, whether people need to be hospitalized or living in extended care facilities, and specialized equipment such as wheelchairs. So it's not just whether people get medicine. And then down here is where you're going to cite your sources as a source list, which we're going to come up with later on. And you can see that I've given you an example down below. But this does not mean you won't be using in-text citations in this portion of the form, and that's what we're going to start to talk about a little bit more. How do I do both kinds of citation? I'm going to spend the rest of the video focused on the correct way to cite this and other papers. If you already know how to do it, then you can stop now. But do make sure that you both cite in text and at the end of the assignment, what we call the source list, when you're completing this and all assignments in our program. That's an academic standard. You might think that you've done enough by creating a source list, but you would not comply with the plagiarism policy in our class or anywhere else if you did that. So I will describe in the rest of the video both how to do this and when, and I'll even do a little bit of an online demonstration here for using one of the websites that I recommend. You can also remember to download these notes and use them as a guide because there are some examples here. So, citation. Some important things to understand when you go and you select on an online one or you start looking up how to do it, you'll be offered a variety of different choices. And the two most common you'll see are the MLA style and the APA style. Sometimes you'll see other ones like Chicago style, Turabian style, and even one called Vancouver style. But we're going to use APA always, and that's because that particular format is associated with social services, and that's what we are. And APA, you've used this before, stands for American Psychiatric Association. So that basically means that everybody is using the same format that was created by them. It's important to understand that wherever you go in your career or your education, the ability to cite sources is going to be a legal and ethical issue. You can get in a lot of trouble if you don't do it. So you have to be able to do it correctly. You cite any information that's new to you. Many people think we only have to cite things that are direct quotes, so they change a few words and think that they're good. But that's not correct. You have to cite any new information, even if it's going to be substantially changed from what you read. You should use an online style guide. Most of you will find it far easier, and these are free. something like Citation Machine or EasyBib. If you choose to go on to another level of education and you're writing big papers, you can actually buy an upgraded version of these, not terribly expensive. And what's really cool about them is that they will create your bibliography for you. They'll remember your sources as you enter them, and at the end of the assignment, you just print it off and it easily does that for you. You should keep your sources as you take notes. One of the big things people sometimes say to me is that they can't remember where they got something. This especially happens if they hand me something in and they didn't correctly cite, and then I ask them to do so. People will either tell me they don't remember where they got it, or they'll fake it and think I won't check it. It's really important as you're taking notes to actually write on the note form where you got that piece of information, the book, the author, and even the page number. The rest of the information you may want to add later on, but at least as you go back and look at that piece of info, you'll know where to get it. And the other thing that sometimes gets people messed up is that they're not sure how to correctly cite something. If it's a book or a journal article or a newspaper article, for example, and they got it off the internet, is that considered a website? And the answer is no. If you got something online that would have typically existed in a print form, like a newspaper, a magazine, or a book, it is considered to be a print resource. If you have a film that's on YouTube, it's not a website. You're going to cite the film, and as part of the whole format, you'll say where you found it. But it's not a website. The only time you do this is when you're at an actual website. And when you go onto these websites that do citation, you'll see that they offer you a variety of different format choices. And so the computer program automatically knows what to do if you're citing is a video from somebody or a pamphlet from somebody. There are a lot of different formats, and that's one of the reasons why I recommend people use a website. When you're citing in text, the important things for our course are that you include the author, year, and page number as you write the new information. They're called in-text sources because they literally happen in the main text of your paper. So for example, if you were writing a sentence about a disorder and you got it from a book that had an author named Smith, it was written in 2018, and you got it from page 11, all of that information would be in that sentence. At the end of it, we would have learned all of that information. So if you have two or more sentences in a row, then you would put it before the end of the second sentence if those pieces of information came from the same person. If you're jumping around and you have other new pieces of information in between, you'll need to do it when it's new every time again. So citation comes before you end the sentence when you do this. There are 3 different ways that people can do it. And by far the most common is the one at the first bullet. So in this sentence, brown dogs live an average of 3.7 years longer than white dogs, which by the way is a completely fabricated fact. We have fictitiously taken it from a book with an author named Cole. The year it was published was 1990, and I got this from page 19. So you'll notice that I do not have any other information about this source here. I do not have its publisher. I do not have the title. Why? Well, because I can easily go to the source list afterwards and find this particular piece of information just by the clues that are given here. So the aim is not to replicate everything that goes in the bibliography or the source list. Instead, it's to give me a bit of a breadcrumb or a trail that tells me I can follow this. The reason that we include the year is because sometimes you'll have a reference from an author that's in one year, and you'll have another reference from the same author published in a different year. And this is how we can distinguish them. But what happens if I choose to put the name of the author right into the sentence? Well, then I don't need to put it in those parentheses. So here in the second bullet, according to Cole, and then you can see I put the year, brown dogs live longer than white ones, page 19. I could have put them together, by the way. I could have put 1990, comma, page 19. And sometimes people actually like to put both the year and the author's name in, and all that's remaining to go into the parentheses, or what lots of people call brackets, is the page number. And the reason that I made a point of referring to them as parentheses is that when you're using an online program, sometimes they'll call them in-text citations, and sometimes because they're done in parentheses, they'll call them parentheticals. They're the same thing. A parenthetical is an in-text citation. And I'll show you how you can do one citation on an online citing machine, and it'll create both types for you automatically. Now let's talk about what to do at the end of your document. This can be called a bibliography, a reference list, or a source list. All of them are acceptable titles for this section. Here you're going to cite every single source you used, even if you didn't end up having to use it for an in-text citation. Sometimes a source just corroborated or made you feel confident in something you got from another book. And so you don't need to put it into your in-text citations. It's actually a good thing to show your professors and instructors that you had more sources than you cited there, and that shows them that you've done a little bit of extra digging and research. You'll always list this section alphabetically based on the last name of the author, and the italics are always reserved for the title of the work. Sometimes it's the title of the article or the book, and sometimes it's the title of the journal, and the actual title of the article in it is not italicized. Once again, using an online format will help you to make sure you do this right, and you won't have to worry about it as long as you plug things in the right boxes. And we don't use bullet points when we do a bibliography or reference list. If we're citing a book, which is one of the more common things, you can see that we're going to have the person's last name, comma, and then they're usually their first two initials if that is provided, and then parentheses the year of publication. Now, once again, you can see how picky this formatting is, and that's one more reason for using an online citation generator. But if you want to, you can also download some really good templates and do it yourself. For example, the OWL by Purdue University is one that saved me a lot of trouble before there was good online mechanisms. And it'll italicize the title of work, and it'll give you a capital letter for the subtitle. It'll also ask you the location, and let's talk about that one for a moment. Sometimes when you open up a book, it'll say that it's published in 3 cities: Sydney, Australia, Vancouver, BC, and New York. So usually you take the one that's closest to where you live, and then the name of the publisher. When you're using a book, most of the information that you need is going to be in the under the front cover on what's called the frontispiece. So that first page has the title on it, and some of the information's on the front of it, and some of it's on the back. When you're asked for the year of publication, they're asking for what's called the copyright date. So not the date that it was most recently published, and that can be confusing to people. Websites, you do it this way. You put the author and the date of publication and the title of the article, and everything else kind of goes the same way, but you'll notice that you have to cite where you got it from, retrieved from. And this is what we call the URL. You're not giving the name of the website here. You're giving the specific address that somebody would go to. And the best way to do this is literally to select it from your browser, from the very top bar of your browser, cut it and paste it right in here. Now, one more thing before I move off of this. People often struggle with the authorship when they cannot find the name of a particular person. So they don't know quite what to do when it's an organization that's the title author, whether it's the American Diabetes Association or the National Institutes of Health or the University of New Hampshire. When you do that, you will be asked on online generators whether or not you have a corporate name, and that's where you would put it. Or if you're doing it yourself, you simply treat that whole phrase as the last name. So if it's the American Diabetes Association, you would not have Association American Diabetes. You would have American Diabetes Association or National Institutes of Health. Another way to do that is simply leave the first name space blank and put all the information in the last name. Okay, if you cannot identify the author, then you probably shouldn't use the source. So here are some examples. I don't want to spend a lot of time on them. Sometimes a book will have more than one author, or an article will. And so you can simply put the 2 authors in the order that they are listed on that frontispiece, that first page that shows the authorship. Sometimes there are multiple authors, 3, 4, and 5. When you start getting into the 4 and 5 range, and sometimes even the 3, you're going to use the Latin expression et al, et space al, after your first name. And the rest of the names will just be that way in your citation. And basically, it's a Latin way of saying Smith and all, Smith and everybody else. Okay, so you'll notice the one thing I want to point out here is that the book found online is exactly the same as the book. However, the only difference is that at the end it says where it was retrieved from and gives this full web address. Okay, let's take a look at an actual online example and try it together. Okay, hopefully this is visible to you, and we're going to try and do it by having the two pieces of information or the two websites open at the same time. On the left, I'm going to cite information from a website, in this case the Government of Canada's website, and on the right I'm going to use the Citation Machine online citation generator. You could also look at EasyBib, and there are others. You'll notice that it offers you a couple of different choices, and in fact you can go and purchase them and so forth. But I'm going to not do that. I'm going to click on a new thing. I'm going to only want to create new citations. Very first thing I'm going to do is check that I want APA. Now this is the scene I'll get. Now remember, you won't have this left-hand window unless you decide to split your window like this. I'm just doing this to make it easier. So you'll see this whole thing from the Citation Machine website across your screen. I check, I see that I've got the red box up here saying APA, I'm good shape. Now this is a website. It's produced by the Government of Canada. I'm pretty confident that it's a good website. So I'm going to select on the tab that says website. You can see there are a bunch of other ones for the most common sources, but you could also click on other if you had something that was more obscure. For example, a pamphlet or lecture notes or an interview on the news would all be sources that you might find here. Government publications would be another. But here, website does it for me. I click on it this way. Now you'll see that it gives you two different choices. One is the autofill mode. So in order to do that, I'm going to see whether or not the website that I actually want to cite has been cited by somebody before. If that happens, good news. The website remembers it, and all I have to do is give it the website address or URL, and everything is good. If not, there's a method that I can do manual entry, and I'll show you that next. Let's find out. So I'm going to go over here in this case. If it was a book, by the way, I would just give the title. But I'm going to go over here to this bar. This is my URL or address bar. I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to see whether or not the website has ever been cited before. And it does. It comes up, Government of Canada, Public Health. I'm going to take a look at it and select it. So it tells me that it has most of the information in it. The one thing it doesn't have is the publisher or sponsor. Well, that's easy. I can add that. It happens to be the exact same people who authored it, the government. So I'm going to do the final step and add it. You can see that it says the article title. Well, it's actually not the article title. And this is one of the things. Sometimes you actually need to go back and fix it. So the article title is actually Chronic Obstructive Pulmonary Disease. I had to pick one that had a lot of typing. The author is Public Health Canada. And that's good. We have that right here. And you can see the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm scanning over it so you can see it. And as I said, the person that did this the first time correctly put it in this box because it's a corporation. So you only use this box for last name if there's a person with the last name, and then you put their first name and middle initial. But if it's an organization like Government of Canada, all you do is put this. Now, what if you have more than one author? You can add another contributor right here. In this case, we don't need to do that. You can add as many as there are. I've got the URL right there. When was it published? Well, it says it was published December 9th, but I want to verify that. Let's take a look. And there it is. I usually can find it at the bottom, and also sometimes if there's a specific author, I can find it there. Here I knew there wouldn't be because I've used this website before. And you can see that the date is correct. But it also asks the date that it was accessed. That's an important thing when you use websites. And it gives you the little option to click today. Oh, wonderful, saves me some time. Now, it doesn't ask me about about the publisher here, so it doesn't look like I actually need that. If I needed it, it would ask me. I'm good to go. I create citation. And now you can see that that's what it looks like. All I need to do is go and copy that into my paper. I can click copy here if I want to do that, or I can download it, and it shows me that it is an APA. What if I want to get an in-text citation? Remember I said that sometimes it says parenthetical? Well, look at that. That's proof that they're both the same thing. I click on in-text citation, and I've told you that what I want you to give me are pages. It doesn't give me the pages option here, and you'll see, and I'll tell you what to do about that. And don't check the title. I want the name of the author, the year, and the pages. If it's a website, let me show you what to do. Type the word website, and you will see this come up. I copy that by clicking on copy and paste, and I can put it into my paper in the in-text format we talked about before. If it's another page, because it's a book, then I can do that, right? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And yes, I see that it has the P down here for page. Not too worried about it. If you really want to be fancy schmancy, you can edit it, or you can go back and change it in your paper itself. Now, I'm going to show you one more thing. Let's pretend that when I did this, I'm going to go back a few pages. I went to do this and it didn't have my information. Let's pretend I was doing with a source that had never been entered before. Manual entry mode. Okay, and this can happen. So I'm going to do this, and it gives me the opportunity to do it. So now I'm just going to put the information in by hand. Okay, so I'm going to put chronic obstructive pulmonary, I knew I'd do that, pulmonary disease. The contributors, again, I'm going to choose the author. You can see that it gives you choices. I chose author because that's what it is. So this is the Public Health Agency of Canada. It's right there, right? Public Health Agency of Canada. Oops, and I'm done there. The URL, exactly as I did it before. I click on it. I push Control-C. If I'm using a Mac, I think it works the same way on a PC. And then Command or Control-V, and it's going to do it. If you want to drop the drop-down menu, you can do that. I already know the date it was published from before, but I find it at the top or the bottom. Here it is, December 9th, 2019. Sometimes, by the way, you can't find this, and then you just use the date accessed, and that's okay if that happens. But if you can find it, you do. 9th day, December 2019. And then the day I cited it again here. I don't need to create any kind of annotation. And there I go. And it should say what my resource is. Now, this is a free website, so in order to get your free things, it'll ask you to watch an ad every 48 hours. We've been kind of lucky it hasn't tried to do that once before in our demo. I'm not going to make you watch an ad, but when I click on this, I'll get the exact same thing that I got before when it automatically generated it. So I could still create the online texting, in-text citation, as well as the source list citation. And this has been done for a website, but you can easily do it for a book, a website, a video, a newspaper article, or any other source, simply by correctly choosing the right source. If you have any questions, I'd like you to try it before you call me. I'd like you to see what worked and what didn't work, because then I could actually help you to fix it a little. And a lot of people get freaked out by it, but it's more tedious than it is difficult. And I'll admit that it is tedious, but if you get in the habit of doing it as you work, you'll find it goes a lot easier, and it becomes just kind of a simple consideration. So try it, don't let it freak you out, and good luck.